In early childhood education, we promote the idea that children learn by doing. This is so true in mathematics education, and it's important for teachers of young children to understand the mathematics process skills. You'll be required to think about these skills and apply them in your planning of investigations related to math for the children. The first process skill is problem solving. All young children are problem solvers, and especially in preschool environments, it's important that children develop the dispositions towards problem solving and really begin to think about themselves as having a positive attitude towards mathematics. Many teachers don't have a positive attitude about their experiences learning math, and so this can transfer onto children. So we need children to think about themselves as being effective problem solvers. So in thinking about solving problems, the first thing is that we need to consider that children should solve problems on their own as much as possible. And this is really important because oftentimes teachers solve problems for children, especially in routines, because they want children to move more quickly through the process. So in terms of problem solving, there's 4 different steps that we should consider. So the first thing to consider is that children will really take time to explore the materials and possibilities in a problem situation, that they can identify that there's a problem there that they want to solve, and begin to gain an understanding of the problem. And you need to really understand it and know what you want your outcome to be in order to solve the problem. So the second step is that you need to plan to solve your problem. Planning involves thinking ahead and considering alternatives, both thinking about the process for young children and for teachers, and considering how they can engage together and how teachers can encourage children to ask questions, and teachers can scaffold learning for kids to help them kind of come up with a plan that will help them work towards their goal. And the next problem solving step is to carry out the plan and implement it and try it out and see if it works. And if the plan doesn't work, this requires them to go back and modify the plan and try it again. As a teacher, promoting critical thinking and reflection will help them with their planning process. And that's the reflection process of really looking back and thinking critically about the steps in the process and steps that they might have ignored as they went through it. So in thinking about the teacher's role in promoting problem solving, the first is to create an environment with materials that can support children's problem solving. This is very, very important because unless problems exist, children don't have the opportunities to solve them. And there are so many problems that exist in children's lives every single day. They could ask, how many outfits can I wear? How many shirts do I have? How many days do we have until the weekend? There are so many different questions that children have. And oftentimes we want to solve problems for children to move them through quickly. We're so worried about getting to the next place, we oftentimes don't focus on the process. So it's important that we help them to identify these problems that are meaningful to them, talk with them, listen, and then help them think about how they're going to work on these problems and really model problem-solving strategies and the good dispositions to persevere with a problem and not give up or ask someone for help immediately or expect someone to solve the problem for them. It's important that as a teacher, you sort of convey a sense of joy in solving problems and really like the challenge, and then that will help children acknowledge that you can be frustrated at times, but this can also be motivating and encouraging. So for teachers, one thing that you can do is to pose questions and make comments along the way to really help children to think about examining their problems in different ways, to encourage them to share with others, to through verbal or other representational experiences, and really giving children a sense that their interests are important and that you can construct and understand problems better that are meaningful and within their world, and not ignoring those problems that are so important. So oftentimes children will jump in and just try to solve a problem without thinking through it very much. So it's really important that you provide them with very specific feedback. Teachers often are so quick to reinforce children's right answers, just say, oh, good job, you got that right, and move on, and dismiss their wrong answers. One of the best things we can do to help children learn is to really acknowledge their misconceptions and then help them work through that. In addition, they can apply logical classification skills. They might begin by eliminating possibilities and understanding that certain things are not something. So they'll pull out the things that don't fit in solving a problem and use that as a way to narrow down the solution to their problem. You also want to encourage them to explain their thinking and share their assumptions with you. Then justify their solutions and processes is another important skill. Oftentimes they rely on intuition in solving problems and just do things because they believe that it's right, but yet they can't really explain their reasoning, and they're not aware of how they arrive at the answer. So it's important to kind of encourage them to justify the solutions and processes, which is part of reasoning. Oftentimes they'll apply patterns and relationships that they've experienced from the world and make those connections to arrive at different solutions. They just know that things are because they've happened before, but we want to start to encourage them to make more concrete connections between things. It's also important that children make sense out of mathematics and science and use these reasoning skills to better understand how things work. So let's take a second to look at the teacher's role in promoting reasoning. Obviously, we need to provide experiences for children so that they can engage in logical reasoning, and this will help them to develop clarity and precision in their thinking. It's important to give children familiarity with language of logic and reasoning, and so you should get into the habit of using words and phrases such as if this, then not this, or because, sometimes, never, probably. Using that type of language will help children realize that there's some reasoning involved and it's not black and white, and there's not always laws that you can apply to everything. You want to encourage children to share their assumptions about how things work and then to start justifying them. It's important that children not just think about this occurs because it always occurs, but how can I explain that and give them opportunities to use charts and graphs and language and different methods to share their assumptions, not just using one way to explain it. Give them the vocabulary, but also give them other tools. And then, of course, that you should use reasoning language and encourage them to think about the daily occurrences in their lives that require them to reason and think out loud about their thoughts. And oftentimes they keep things in their heads. And what we need to do is facilitate deeper thinking and encourage them as much as possible to share that reasoning process, and that means that they must develop the language and vocabulary of reasoning. Another process skill that children use in understanding mathematics and learning mathematics is the idea of connecting. What's most important is that children connect their intuitive, informal mathematical experiences that they've had every day to their learning in school. Oftentimes we start to present rules to children, and we can't do mathematical rules with children unless they understand first the process of mathematics. And so it's important that instead of focusing on those rules, that we think about how the learning within school can more reflect what children naturally understand about math. So it's really important that we start with what children believe and understand and those assumptions, and then make links from those informal experiences to the more formal teaching of mathematics. It's also important that we connect mathematics to other content areas. This can occur really unexpectedly in the classroom, as there are so many opportunities to integrate math as you're reading and playing and engaging in everyday activities. It can also occur in other content areas of the classroom, in certainly different learning centers within the classroom. Children are really excited to make sense about their learning and apply information from one content area to others. So it's important for teachers to really encourage them to use counting and geometry and algebraic understanding and data and problem solving in their play in many different areas of the classroom. It's also important that we think about the connections between math and everyday activities. Obviously, we use math every day. There are so many opportunities to engage in math in everyday context that teachers can really link mathematical ideas and vocabulary to children's experiences throughout the day, when they're making art projects, when they're building with blocks, when they're reading, when they're singing songs, when they're thinking about their schedule of the day. The connections present themselves, and it's really important that we start to highlight and think about those connections and help children make sense of their world using mathematics. So how can teachers promote children's connection of math throughout the day? And so it's really important that we use familiar experiences and materials that children know and are comfortable with. And this will really help them in making sense and applying math in ways that are meaningful. You can also use math vocabulary to describe activities. So as you are engaged in an activity, you can point out the math that occurs naturally and really use experiences from children's everyday lives. Really, the number of connections that can be made quite naturally between math and other content areas like literacy, language, science, art, construction, movement, and music are just so many. So for the educator and the teacher, it's important that these connections be natural and not forced, that we don't teach math out of context, but that we think about math always and understand what children should be developing in terms of their mathematical thinking and skills, and really integrate those into the naturally occurring classroom. The final process skill for children in the area of mathematics is representation. It's very important that children develop multiple ways to represent what they know and understand about mathematics. Representations often help children to make the relationships that they already understand about mathematics more obvious. By having children create their own representations, you can better understand their knowledge and skills as well as their misconceptions. Some common ways that children will represent relationships are by organizing their data, recording events, and sharing their ideas. So teachers and parents often introduce children to the common forms of numerical representations, such as tally marks, holding up your fingers, definitely domino dots and dots on dice, pictures of objects, 10 frames, actual numbers, and very young children will typically use their fingers to show their age, but not always really understanding that fingers stand for a number and a quantity, but they'll gradually get the idea as they get older. So it's important to understand that children will use representations that we've taught them if they can memorize them, but what's most important is that they develop an understanding. And so while using fingers is a common representation, it's easy to understand that there are 5 fingers on each hand, so there's some symmetry there. It's important that children really think through and that we teach them what these representations mean before we jump on to the next form. So what's the teacher's role in promoting mathematical representation? It's important that we promote flexibility and that we let children show their understanding through various representations, and we should introduce children to many different options. It's also important that we provide these within meaningful contexts, that we encourage children to represent and communicate their understanding through everyday activities. And we really need to think about math as integrated into our classrooms, and that children should learn different representations that are going to help them to explain what they're doing and to help them in their reasoning. We should ask children to verbally and concretely represent what they know and understand or think about things, and use other forms besides just numbers. When children see teachers using representations throughout the day and see the practicality in them and the different ways that teachers can make meaning and create understanding using representations of mathematical concepts, children will become more familiar with them and use them in their emerging mathematical understanding and start to use commonly accepted mathematical representations, but also understanding first that there's other ways that you can show what you know and show what's happening in terms of math learning. So this was a lot of information, but I hope it helps you in really thinking about children's mathematical processes as well as how you can support the development of these process skills.